When you picture a dictator, you're probably thinking of a ranting madman, ruling by sheer terror. You see the screaming rallies, the iron-fisted salutes, the monuments of bronze and stone built to scream power. But what if the most successful tyrants of our time don't shout? What if they've learned to whisper, to persuade, to make you believe their power was your idea all along? This is the terrifying, subtle psychology of the modern dictator, a playbook being used right now with chilling success. They aren't just lunatics clinging to power. Their every move is cold, calculated, and terrifyingly familiar. We're going to dissect that playbook. We'll show you how they weaponize charisma, not just fear, how they manipulate information in an age of endless data, and how they build a cult of personality more binding than any prison wall. We're going inside their minds to understand their twisted logic, and to ask the most unsettling question of all: what does it say about us that we keep falling for it? The classic 20th century dictator is a figure etched into our memory. Men like Hitler, Stalin, and Mao ruled through a spectacle of terror. Their power came from mass repression, the constant threat of violence, and rigid ideologies that demanded total submission. They sealed their countries off from the world, brutally controlled information, and crushed dissent with overwhelming force. They were, in short, fear dictators. Their main tool was the bludgeon. But as the world changed, so did tyranny. After the Cold War, with the explosion of the internet and a globalized economy, the old playbook started to fail. Overt violence became harder to hide and more costly on the world stage. Even authoritarian states wanted the benefits of trade, investment, and technology. This new world needed a new kind of leader, one who understood the power of image, information, and influence. Enter the spin dictator. This new brand of strongman was identified by political scientists Sergei Guriev and Daniel Treisman. They saw that a new breed of media-savvy leaders was redesigning authoritarianism. Instead of the jackboot, their main weapon is spin. Rulers like Russia's Vladimir Putin, Turkey's Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Hungary's Viktor Orban have learned to control people not primarily through overt terror, but by twisting information while faking democracy. They've swapped the military uniform for a tailored suit. They hold elections, but these are carefully managed to keep them in power, not to challenge it. They allow some independent media to exist, but the major outlets are all controlled by their allies, relentlessly shaping the story to their advantage. Why burn all the books when you can just flood the library with your own? This model was pioneered by leaders like Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew, who proved you could keep an iron grip on power while projecting an image of competence and prosperity. These leaders grasped a key shift. In a connected world, brute force is bad for business. It's much smarter to create the illusion of choice, freedom, and popular support. They focus more on shaping your opinion than on sending out the secret police, though that option is always there, waiting in the wings. Think about Vladimir Putin's early rise. After the chaos of the 1990s, Russia was a country reeling from economic collapse and a loss of identity. Putin didn't storm the Kremlin in a coup. He was appointed and then elected by promising to restore order and national greatness. He didn't present himself as a tyrant, but as a competent, disciplined manager, the exact opposite of what came before. His KGB background made him a specialist in human relations, as he put it. He understood psychology, leverage, and manipulation. In his early years, he allowed some media freedom and opposition to exist, but it was a managed freedom. The biggest TV networks were brought under state control, and a new story began to take shape. Only Putin could save Russia from its enemies, at home and abroad. He was spinning the myth, building his popularity, not with mass arrests, but with a carefully built image as the indispensable man. This is the spin dictator's core strategy: manufacture popularity, then use that popularity to slowly tear down the institutions that could ever challenge you. It's a quiet, insidious, and devastatingly effective way to build a dictatorship in plain sight. To hold on to power, the modern dictator uses a sophisticated psychological toolkit. These aren't just random acts of ego, they are calculated strategies meant to shape reality and neutralize anyone who gets in their way. First, they have to control the narrative. If you can control what people see and believe, you control them. This is way more than just old school propaganda. It's a multi-layered strategy of information dominance. In countries like Russia and China, the state has a near total monopoly over TV, which is still the main news source for millions. The news isn't just biased, it's a performance. Stories are framed to show the leaders as a wise, decisive father of the nation. For years, Vladimir Putin has held his annual Direct Line, a masterclass in political theatre, where he appears to take unscreened calls from regular citizens. He listens to their problems, a leaky roof, a corrupt local official, and orders a solution on the spot. The message is powerful. The system might be flawed, but the leader is a good, competent man who can fix anything. It drills in the idea that he's the only one who can govern. This creates what Guriev and Treisman call the illusion of competence. The leader gets credit for every success, while failures are blamed on foreign enemies, traitors, or incompetent officials. If the news is good, it's everywhere. If it's bad, it's buried, excused, or drowned in a sea of disinformation. China, under Xi Jinping, has taken this to a terrifying new level. The Great Firewall is a massive censorship system that blocks foreign websites and scrubs sensitive terms from the Chinese internet. But censorship is only half of it. The state also floods the internet with its own content, using an army of paid commentators to post pro-government talking points and drown out dissent. This strategic flooding doesn't just silence critics, it makes their views impossible to even find. While Xi retains ultimate control, he has allowed Premier Li Qiang to handle the finer details of the economy, ensuring the machine of the state runs smoothly while he directs its overall path. With this level of control, the regime can redefine reality. Dissent isn't a difference of opinion, it's treason. Protests are foreign-funded plots. Journalists uncovering corruption are enemies of the state. This is how you manufacture consent, not by convincing everyone, but by making opposition seem illegitimate and dangerous. Next, the spin dictator has to build a cult of personality. Competence isn't enough. They need adoration. The leader has to become more than a politician. They have to be a symbol of the nation's soul, the restorer of its lost glory. In Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan has brilliantly woven religion and nationalism into his political identity. He presents himself as the champion of the conservative heartland against a corrupt, westernized elite. He talks about the glory of the Ottoman Empire, positioning himself as a modern sultan. This creates a powerful us versus them dynamic that energizes his base and paints his opponents as enemies of the nation itself. Of course, no one has perfected the personality cult like North Korea. The Kim dynasty has turned it into a state religion. Citizens are taught from birth that the leaders are godlike beings. Their biographies are myths, filled with tales of impossible feats. This total monopoly on information allows the regime to deify the Kims and demonize the outside world, creating a sealed reality where the leader is the only source of truth. Vladimir Putin's cult of personality is all about strength. The media endlessly circulates images of him riding a horse shirtless, practicing judo, or tranquilizing a tiger. These aren't just for show, they are propaganda, designed to project an image of a powerful leader who is physically and mentally superior to the weak, decadent leaders of the West. The psychological effect is profound. The leader and the state become one. To criticize the leader is to betray the nation. This creates a powerful emotional bond with supporters, who see their own pride reflected in the strength of their leader. But even the best spin isn't always enough. That brings us to the third tool, weaponizing fear. Unlike the old dictators, the modern autocrat uses fear surgically. It's a targeted fear, meant to divide the population and justify crackdowns. The easiest way to do this is to create an enemy. Authoritarians need an us versus them story. They convince the public they are under siege from dark forces both outside and inside the country. This creates a climate of fear that makes people willing to trade freedom for security. The external enemy is usually the West, especially the United States. Leaders like Putin and Xi claim that foreign powers are trying to undermine their country and corrupt their culture. Every internal problem, from a bad economy to protests, is blamed on them. The internal enemies are even more useful. They are the traitors, the foreign agents, the terrorists. These labels are deliberately vague and can be slapped on anyone: journalists, activists, or political opponents. In Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro has constantly used the threat of an external enemy and internal saboteurs to justify brutal crackdowns. This taps into something primal. When people feel threatened, they rally around a strong leader who promises protection. Research has shown that leaders with these dark personality traits are great at fueling hostility among their followers. This permanent state of crisis gives the dictator the perfect excuse to do what they always wanted: dismantle checks and balances, and crush dissent. Anti-terror laws are used to prosecute peaceful critics. Fake news laws are used to shut down independent media. Fear becomes the justification for tyranny. So, what kind of person wants absolute power and is willing to do anything to keep it? While we can't exactly put a head of state on a psychiatrist's couch, decades of research point to a disturbing cluster of personality traits known as the Dark Triad. The Dark Triad is made up of 3 traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. First, narcissism. This is way more than just vanity. It's an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep-seated belief that you are superior and destined to rule. The narcissistic leader sees themselves as the savior of the nation and demands unquestioning loyalty. Criticism isn't just a disagreement, it's a personal insult to their genius. Second, Machiavellianism. This is a cynical, manipulative approach to other people. A Machiavellian leader is a master strategist who sees people as pawns. They lie, cheat, and betray to get what they want. This is the mind of the spin dictator, someone who sees politics as a game to be won through cunning, not public service. Third, and most chilling, is psychopathy. This is defined by a shocking lack of empathy, emotional coldness, and a disregard for social rules. A leader with psychopathic traits can make ruthless decisions without a shred of guilt. They simply don't feel the suffering of the people they oppress. This allows them to order purges, authorize torture, and start wars with cold detachment. When Vladimir Putin brought a large dog to a meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, knowing she was deeply afraid of dogs, it was a calculated act of psychological intimidation. Together, these traits create a toxic cocktail of grandiosity, paranoia, and cruelty. Narcissistic leaders surround themselves with sycophants, creating an echo chamber that cuts them off from reality. Their paranoia leads them to see conspiracies everywhere, justifying brutal purges against anyone they perceive as a threat. Where does this come from? For some, the path to tyranny starts in childhood. Many infamous dictators had histories of trauma or abuse. Adolf Hitler's abusive father and feelings of failure are thought to have fueled his monstrous cruelty. Saddam Hussein's violent upbringing taught him that brutality was a normal tool of control. Early experiences of being powerless can create a lifelong obsession with having absolute power. Putin himself often tells a story from his childhood about cornering a rat, only to have it leap out and attack him. teaching him a lasting lesson. It's often seen as a key to his mindset. Always attack when you feel threatened, never show weakness. This raises a fascinating and disturbing question. Do these leaders actually believe their own propaganda? The line between cynical manipulation and genuine delusion is thin. A dictator might start by cynically crafting a myth, but over time, surrounded by yes men, cut off from criticism, and drenched in their own propaganda, they can start to believe it. This is the most dangerous state, when a calculating leader starts buying into his own narcissistic fantasies, making him more unpredictable, more prone to error, and an even greater threat to the world. The spin dictator model is clever, but it's also brittle. It depends on a steady stream of good news, a healthy economy, and a narrative that holds up. When reality gets too harsh to spin, when the economy tanks, when people lose their fear, or when a short, victorious war becomes a bloody nightmare, the mask starts to slip. And that's when the spin dictator often transforms, regressing into the old-school fear dictator they tried so hard to appear different from. The tools of persuasion are thrown away, and the regime falls back on raw, unadulterated terror. We've all watched this happen in real time. For nearly 2 decades, Putin's rule in Russia was a masterclass in spin. His legitimacy was built on rising living standards and restoring national pride. He held elections and tolerated a tiny opposition, as long as no one challenged his ultimate authority. But the foundation started to crack. A stagnant economy eroded the promise of a better life. A new generation, raised on the internet, was more skeptical of state propaganda. Protests like those inspired by opposition leader Alexei Navalny showed a growing anger. The story was starting to fall apart. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine was the moment Putin, the spin dictator, died, and Putin, the fear dictator, was fully born. The initial story, a swift, special military operation, crumbled. The illusion of competence was shattered. Unable to spin the reality of a brutal, costly war, the regime turned to fear. Draconian censorship laws were passed, criminalizing any reporting that wasn't the official government line. The last independent media outlets were shut down. Protesting the war became a crime punishable by years in prison. The bludgeon, held in reserve for so long, was now being wielded openly. This turn is often inevitable. The dictator's ego can't handle failure. His narcissism demands victory. His paranoia sees betrayal in every setback. When his carefully built image is threatened, his only move is to lash out and crush all opposition by force. Turkey's government has shown this tendency too. As economic problems grow, the response has often been more repression and the jailing of political rivals. This is the most dangerous phase of a modern dictatorship. It means the leader has given up on pretending he has the people's support and is now ruling purely through force. The state becomes more violent, more unpredictable, and more repressive. It's a sign of desperation, a desperation that can drag a country into an abyss. It proves that behind the modern, media-savvy mask, the old, brutal instincts of tyranny were there all along. The patterns we're talking about aren't just in history books. They are active playbooks being used to undermine democracy all over the world. Understanding these tactics is the first step to recognizing and resisting them. If you're finding this breakdown useful for making sense of our crazy world, take a second to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're committed to giving you the deep analysis you won't get from the headlines, and your support is what makes all of that possible. Every dictatorship, no matter how powerful it looks, carries the seeds of its own destruction. All that concentrated power, the lies, the fear. It creates a system that's inherently unstable. But if history teaches us anything, it's that taking down a dictator is an incredibly hard and dangerous job. The romantic idea of a popular uprising sweeping away a tyrant is, unfortunately, the exception, not the rule. Modern dictatorships are built to last. They have total control over the military and police. Protests are often met with brutal force. Their control of the media allows them to paint protesters as foreign-backed thugs, turning the public against them. So, how do dictators fall? Usually, it's not from the bottom up, but from the top down. The biggest threat often comes from an internal coup, where military leaders or other elites decide the leader has become a liability. This is why dictators are so paranoid, constantly shuffling their inner circle. Another path is simply dying of old age, which can trigger a chaotic power struggle if there's no clear successor. This is a huge question mark for a regime like China's, where Xi Jinping has gotten rid of term limits but has no designated heir, creating the potential for a massive conflict when his rule ends. External pressures like economic sanctions can weaken a regime, but it rarely works on its own. In fact, smart dictators use sanctions to their advantage, spinning them as proof of a foreign conspiracy and a reason to rally around the flag. The rare successful revolutions usually require a perfect storm: a deeply unpopular leader, a unified opposition, cracks within the ruling elite, and a security force that refuses to fire on its own people. Even when a dictator does fall, the story isn't over. The collapse of an authoritarian regime often leaves a dangerous power vacuum. Decades of one-man rule hollow out institutions and destroy democratic norms. The aftermath of the Arab Spring is a tragic example. In Libya, the fall of Muammar Gaddafi led to a devastating civil war. In Egypt, a brief, hopeful moment of democracy was followed by a military coup that installed an even more repressive regime. Successful transitions to stable democracy are possible, but they are rare. This is the dictator's final cruel joke. They create a system so dependent on them and so destructive to society that their removal threatens to unleash total chaos. They present a terrible choice: my rule or the abyss. And that fear, the fear of the unknown chaos that might follow, can be the last and most powerful chain that keeps a nation in bondage. We've journeyed inside the mind of the modern dictator and found something much more chilling than a simple madman. We've seen a calculating political operator who wears the mask of a democrat to tear down democracy from the inside. We've dissected the psychological toolkit he uses to manufacture consent, build a personality cult, and weaponize fear. And we've stared into the dark triad, the narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy that drive their lust for power. The rise of the spin dictator is one of the greatest challenges of our time, not just because of their cruelty, but because of their subtlety. They blur the lines, using the language of freedom to justify oppression. Understanding their playbook isn't just an academic exercise, it's an act of civic self-defense. It's about learning to spot the patterns, the creation of enemies, the assault on independent media, the manipulation of truth, and the worship of a single leader. These patterns repeat because the psychology of power never changes. And if we don't spot them early, they win. The question that remains is, in an age of information overload and deep division, can we still see through the spin? What are your thoughts? Let us know down below. I've been Josh, and this is The Villainous Vault. Thank you for watching. See you next time.